In today's video, we will be carrying on with the Quebec and New England expansion update, focusing on benchwork, specifically L-girder benchwork construction. We'll then head over to the rest of the layout and see if we can rail fan some Conrail trains on the main line. I understand that watching a video about benchwork might be like watching paint dry for some of you. That's okay. If it doesn't interest you, you can scroll forward to the 1930 mark of the video and enjoy the Conrail action. At the end of our last video, we had completed cutting out all the plywood subroadbed for the hidden storage level. And we laid it out on the floor and made sure that it would fit. In this video, we are going to show you how we eventually got it to what you see here, raised up off the floor and sitting on top of benchwork. This is as far as I took the plywood subroadbed installation, because the next sheet, which is a 180-degree turn, would rest on top of the loop below. And the track has to be installed first on the lower level before you attempt to install the next level of the Helix. There are many steps to designing and constructing a solid benchwork for your layout. That includes the L-girders, support columns, making sure the height of those support columns are correct, cross beams, risers, and of course bracing. And we'll touch on each of those as we progress through the video. Before we get started on the L-girders, I just have to vent a little bit. This is the first time that I had ordered for delivery lumber from Home Depot. Usually I go in, pick it out myself and take it home. But I didn't have access to a truck bed that could carry 8-foot lengths of lumber. And so I ordered it, and you get what you pay for, sight unseen. Quite a few pieces of the 1x4s and the 2x4s, while they're perfectly fine for framing walls, they're just not good enough for an exposed frame for a layout benchwork. Yeah, just have to say that. It's just not good quality. You really do have to go in and pick the pieces out yourself. So what the heck are L-girders? If you haven't already seen this before, an L-girder is simply the mating of two pieces of wood in the shape of an L. And that provides stiffness in two directions. So the beam that's created doesn't wobble or bend in either the left and right direction or the up and down direction. Typically, I use a 1x2 as a top rail, screwed into a 1x4 as the vertical main beam. It's a good idea to pre-drill the holes for the screws, otherwise you run the risk of cracking the top rail. Sometimes it happens anyway if you're not using a countersink with your drill bit. No need to panic though. A good strong wood glue can help repair this. Using your finger, you force the glue into the crack from both sides and then loosen the screw a little bit, and the wood naturally wants to close the gap. Here we see the approximate placement of the three main L-girders. You'll notice that the L-girders are not placed at the edge of the benchwork. Here you see my first attempt at connecting an L-girder to two 2x4 columns and attempting to level it with clamps on either end. This was actually the hardest part of the build, but eventually I got it done. Everything's square, 90-degree angles, and then tied all three sections together with the first cross beams screwed into each end. Note that the 2x4 columns or legs are actually set at two different heights, but they're very specific heights. The shorter 2x4s are designed in conjunction with the cross beams to carry the return loop directly with no risers. The taller 2x4s are intended to carry the visible portion of the layout, which will be built on top of the staging yard, and they're exactly 12 inches apart. That is, at least according to my calculations and my CAD design, taking into account the 1.5 turns of the Helix. Before any of this could be done, however, it was necessary to confirm the elevation of the track coming through the wall. And that explains these openings in the wall, which we'll talk about next. You may recall from an earlier video, we drilled a hole through the wall from the other side, noting where the center line of the mainline track is, that would come through the wall. I quickly realized that I really couldn't use this opening to set the elevation because there's a track on the other side and I wanted to match up the top of the plywood. So I set about trying to find the right place to cut through the wall on both sides to find the top of the plywood. It didn't help that there was a vertical stud in the way. And for some reason, when I built this wall more than 20 years ago, I didn't use a full-length stud. It was a half-length stud coming down from the ceiling. I don't remember why I did this. Here you see the same opening from the other side, or the existing layout side. And then looking through both sides of the wall from the new room. Of course, the important thing here is to make sure that we are level. That's what we're trying to achieve, and determine what the elevation is of the existing plywood to match up. And luckily for us, we match the bubbles in the middle. For reasons that will become much clearer in a later video, I decided to open up a larger section of the wall here along the edge of the plywood. And the result of all this effort is setting a fixed point, which is the top of the plywood entering the new room at 50¼ inches above the new floor, which is not the same height as the existing concrete floor in the current layout room. So this figure that you see here, 49 5/8 inches, that is the height of all of the tall legs or columns that you saw in the previous clips. And working our way down from this point, according to the track plan and my calculations, which I hope are right, we get to figure out where the top of the L-girders are. And you see that here. This point is 37 5/8 inches off the floor. And now a little bonus for all the effort getting us thus far. Here's a new viewing angle for our layout. Cool. The distance between our main cross beams for the structure just happened to be an even 70 inches. So I just divided that by 5 and set a 14-inch separation for the cross beams that would be installed on top of the L-girders. The cross beams are screwed to the L-girders from underneath the lip of the top rail. And again, as before, because it's a thin piece of wood, it's necessary to pre-drill that hole. It's also easier to do when you're drilling upside down if you have a pilot hole for the screw to follow. In order to determine the length of each of the cross beams, it was necessary to identify where the edge of the layout would be, and that was determined by using the bubble level vertically to establish the point directly above the layout drawing that we had on the floor. This also establishes a convenient and evenly spaced support structure for the fascia that we will eventually be adding to the layout. Note that one of the cross beams does not extend all the way across to the wall, and this is to create a pop-up or a location where I can actually fully stand up inside the layout for access. And it's also behind the future backdrop. One of the cross beams is actually cut at an angle because it lands above a location of the fascia that is actually angled as well. So again, to allow the fascia to flow according to the edge of the layout as designed, we've cut that member at an angle. Here we see the first set of braces going in. Follows the basic rule of triangles. This makes for a very rigid structure. Unfortunately, I split one of the 1x2s again, but again, it was an easy fix. Filled it with glue, loosened the screw a bit, and then clamped it because this was a particularly nasty split. And I wanted to make sure that it would stay closed after the glue dried. And here's a view looking in the other direction at the other main support. Notice that the right side is missing a triangular brace, and that's because I wanted to preserve an easy access for me to crawl through and stand up inside the Helix. When I first reassembled the plywood subroadbed on top of the Benchwork, I thought for a moment that I had dodged a bullet, that maybe I didn't have to notch it out at the corners of the wall right there, and maybe I only had to shorten a piece because there was still some overlap. And I got to thinking, well, why does it look like it almost fits? Even the second level of hidden trackage here seemed to fit. No problem. No overlap, no notching required. Very suspicious. I didn't expect this. So I thought best to go back to first principles and make sure I've placed the plywood correctly. How to do that though? It turns out that the key to this jigsaw puzzle is the piece in the middle that joins both ends of the loop. It literally acts as a keystone. If this piece isn't placed correctly, the rest of the loop segments will never match the original design. And so I set about to do that using a homemade plumb bob, kite string tied to an old boxcar weight. I tried to establish the exact location of this section of plywood compared to the drawings of the layout on the floor. I did this along two sides of the piece to make sure it was oriented correctly in both directions. If I hadn't done this, the loop might have looked okay and not required notching, but it would have shoved the keystone piece back towards the Helix, and I didn't want to mess with that. So here we see something that's more along the lines of what I originally anticipated. It's the lesser of two evils, even though it really doesn't look like it, and it was a bit of a challenge to deal with. But you see here this section that clearly needs to be notched to fit in against that bump out in the wall. Step one was figuring out the size and orientation of the notch that needed to be cut out. And step two was trimming the side or edge of the plywood sheet, because once the notch was cut out, it bumped up against the wall. Here we see now the finished product, and it seems to fit just right. This process was then repeated for the second level of the hidden staging route, which is the second level of plywood you see here. This is a single track that runs between the staging yard and the tunnel portal that pops out into the visible part of the layout. We'll talk about that in a future video. Figuring out and building benchwork for a Helix is a little bit different than the rest of the layout extension, especially in this case where half the Helix is going to overlap what I've built already and half of it is kind of extending out into nowhere land. I quickly realized that my original plan had too many floating legs that weren't connected to the rest of the benchwork. So I went back to the drawing board and sketched up a concept that essentially just extended the benchwork I just built. It helped to visualize it first on the floor before figuring out how to support it with the legs. It differs from the rest of the benchwork in that I have created like a cap L-girder along the end of the layout here, perpendicular to the rest of the L-girders. And this is to allow for cross beams at 45-degree angles to support the curvature of the Helix. Since each half turn of the Helix represents a 2-inch climb, every quarter is 1 inch and every eighth is a ½ inch. So the trick is to locate and install the cross beams and risers at exactly those locations, making it easier to measure the height of the riser to be installed off the floor in ½ inch increments. Here's the first riser going in with a ½ inch rise. The next riser was installed a little differently. It was screwed directly to the 2x4 leg, and that leg was cut 1 inch longer than the previous one. The bubble level is used each time to make sure that there is no cross slope before the riser is clamped in place. Here we see the cross beam for the 1½ inch riser. Note how it is offset by the thickness of the riser so that the risers are in the right location and not the cross beam. Both the cross beams and the risers are installed such that they are flush with the edge of the layout so that they can also be used to install the fascia. Although we're not installing them now, it was important to check the fit of the other 2 sections of the Helix. As expected, the close proximity to the wall meant that we need to trim a little bit. You can see here that the second half circle is off by about ½ inch, and so we trimmed off some along the wall. Unfortunately, and I'm not quite sure why, this created an offset at the wall, but these sections are wide enough that, you know, it's not going to affect the track laying. It's just a ½ inch offset, but it's a curiosity nonetheless. So in the end, the important thing is that the different sections of the Helix subroadbed overlay roughly in the same spot, so they will match when we come around to try and install the fascia. So overall, I'm happy with it. Maybe a bit of trimming here and there, but very minor. And of course, we can't forget about our bracing. Here's a view looking through the Helix support area. And here's a view from the outside looking in. And in case you were wondering, I did go back and add a center support to the main structure with cross braces. 8 feet is a bit too long a span to leave with just end supports. Well, this wraps up the main benchwork build for this project. There will be more to come as we complete the lowest level and move up to the second and third levels of this section of the expansion. But for now, we are going to turn our attention to laying some cork roadbed and track. Please tune in to our next video to watch that happen. But for now, let's have a look at some Conrail road power. Our first catch of the day is a Westbound manifest with 2 SD60s and an SD40-2 pulling 37 cars and a caboose. Next up is an eastbound drag freight with 3-8-40Cs, or C40-8s in Conrail's language, the lead one being a wide cab. This must be 1990, and that lead unit is brand new. And despite the apparent year, this train does have a caboose trailing its 33 cars. There must be a slow order at this junction. These are two of the hottest trains on the railroad, but they're slow wheeling. The auto train has a mixed bag of Conrail and foreign power, 3 SD40s, a GP38 and a GP40. And the intermodal train has some Q&NE pool power leading 3 Conrail-8-40Bs. We're getting some haze through our telephoto lens here, but we can make out 5 U-boats, a mix of B-23-7s and U-23Bs. Looks like the 2813 is having some electrical issues, being kicked by the 1971 behind. Gotta love that reflection in the lake. Here comes another westbound, struggling up the grade as it exits the East Helix portal. 37 cars, 2 SD60s, and a B23-7. Looks like there's fog rolling in. Eastbound meets westbound at the grade crossing. Modern Conrail bay window caboose meets ex-Pensy caboose. And here's a real treat. Long out of service and now finally repaired SD45-2 number 6656, helping out 3 SD50s on a rather short train. 23 cars plus caboose. I always wanted to try this, freehand panning a moving train from the aisle. Oh look, it's an Operation Lifesaver caboose. Standing on top of the retaining wall, you get a nice view of trains entering and exiting the east portal of the Helix in the cut. This is actually an exposed portion of the Helix. Well, I hope you've enjoyed rail fanning along with us today on the Conrail main lines of the Quebec and New England Railroad. See you next time. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoy layout improvement videos, here are a few others that you may find interesting. If you're not already a subscriber, you can click on the logo on the top right-hand corner of your screen.